Hi, I'm Natasha. When I told my parents I was marrying Kieran, a construction worker from Millbrook, they didn't just disapprove, they disowned me completely. You're throwing away everything we've built for a nobody, my mother spat before slamming the door in my face. But 5 years later, when Forbes revealed my husband's $3.2 billion fortune, guess who came crawling back? What would you have done when they showed up at my door with tears and apologies begging for forgiveness? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in our modest apartment in Riverside Heights. I was brewing coffee in our tiny kitchen, steam fogging up the window that overlooked the parking lot of our building. Kieran had already left for the construction site at dawn, his work boots echoing down the hallway like they had every morning for the past 3 years. Our place wasn't much, a 2-bedroom unit with creaky floors and a radiator that clanged like a ghost in chains. But it was ours. We'd furnished it piece by piece from thrift stores and garage sales, turning what could have been depressing into something warm and lived in. The mismatched chairs around our small dining table, the secondhand couch with the faded floral pattern, the bookshelves made from cinder blocks and old boards. Everything told a story of two people building a life together with love instead of money. I was scrolling through my phone, absent-mindedly checking emails while waiting for the coffee to finish, when a text from my college roommate Priya lit up my screen. "Holy shit, Nat! Check Forbes right now! Is this your Kieran?" My heart did a little skip. Priya only used that many exclamation points when something was seriously wrong or seriously amazing. I opened my laptop, fingers trembling slightly as I navigated to the Forbes website. The morning light streaming through our kitchen window suddenly felt too bright, too sharp. And there it was, plastered across the homepage with a headline that made my coffee mug slip from my hands and crash onto the linoleum floor. "The billionaire next door! Kieran O'Sullivan's $3.2 billion empire hidden in plain sight." I stared at the screen, blinking hard, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. But there was his face, my husband's face, looking back at me from what appeared to be a professional headshot I'd never seen before. His usually tousled brown hair was neatly styled, and he wore a suit that probably cost more than our monthly rent. My hands shook as I scrolled down, reading words that didn't seem real, like tech mogul, anonymous investor, cryptocurrency pioneer, real estate empire. The numbers swam on the screen. $3.2 billion. Billion with a B. I read the article 3 times before it started sinking in. According to Forbes, my husband, the man who left every morning in steel-toed boots and came home with dirt under his fingernails, was one of the wealthiest individuals under 40 in the country. The construction job? Apparently just one of many businesses he owned, though the article suggested it was more of a passion project than a financial necessity. Mr. O'Sullivan has gone to extraordinary lengths to maintain his privacy, the article stated. Sources close to him reveal that he continues to work construction jobs and live modestly, preferring to let his investments speak rather than his lifestyle. When contacted for comment, O'Sullivan simply stated, "Money changes people. I didn't want it to change me." I sank into one of our mismatched kitchen chairs, the one with the wobbly leg that Kieran kept promising to fix, and my mind raced back through 3 years of marriage, searching for clues I'd missed. The way he never seemed stressed about bills, how he'd casually suggested we put my student loans on auto pay and I never had to worry about them again, the mysterious phone calls he'd take on the balcony, always explaining them away as work stuff or boring business things. The small inconsistencies I'd brushed off suddenly felt enormous. Like how he'd known exactly which wine to order at the Ranson restaurant where he'd proposed, or how he'd seemed perfectly comfortable in the upscale hotel lobby where we'd spent our honeymoon, despite claiming he'd never stayed anywhere that nice before. My phone buzzed with another text from Priya. "Girl, your husband is worth more than some small country's GDP. Are you okay?" I wasn't okay.
I was sitting in my pajamas on a Tuesday morning, surrounded by our carefully budgeted life, discovering that my husband had been living a lie for our entire relationship. But it wasn't anger I felt, not yet. It was confusion, pure and overwhelming confusion. The coffee maker beeped, pulling me back to reality. I poured myself a cup with hands that were still trembling, added the store brand creamer we always bought because name brands were unnecessary expenses, and tried to process what this meant.
$3.2 billion. My parents had disowned me for marrying beneath my station, for throwing away my Ivy League education and my trust fund on a nobody construction worker. They'd called him common, unambitious, a dead end who would drag me down to his level. My mother's final words to me had been particularly cutting. Don't come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away for that nobody. Well, that nobody was apparently worth more than my father's entire pharmaceutical empire, more than our family's four-generation fortune, more than everything my parents had built their snobbery on. I sat there in our kitchen, surrounded by our modest life, holding a newspaper article that had just turned everything I thought I knew upside down. The morning sun continued streaming through our simple windows, highlighting dust motes that danced in the air like tiny secrets finally coming to light. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered, "Wait until they find out." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I must have sat at that kitchen table for an hour, staring at the Forbes article until the words blurred together. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, and I hadn't even noticed. My mind kept cycling through the same thoughts. How could I not have known? What else had he hidden for me? And the question that made my stomach twist, did he not trust me? The sound of broken ceramic crunching under my bare feet reminded me that I'd dropped my favorite mug. I looked down at the mess, coffee spreading across the linoleum, white porcelain scattered like tiny bones. It was the mug Kieran had bought me from a gas station on our first road trip together, with "World's Okayest Wife" printed in fading letters. 29 cents at a truck stop outside Clearwater. Now it seemed like a cruel joke. I grabbed paper towels and knelt down on the floor, picking up the pieces. My hands were shaking so badly that I nicked my finger on a sharp edge. A drop of blood mixed with the spilled coffee, and I just sat there watching it spread, feeling oddly detached from my own body. My phone kept buzzing. Text after text. "Priya, seriously, call me back. This is insane." My sister Delilah. "Mom just called screaming. Is this real?" My college friend Zara. "Girl, I'm seeing your husband's face all over social media. What WTF is happening?" I turned the phone face down and pressed my palms against my eyes. The pressure helped, somehow. Made the world smaller, quieter. 3 years we'd been married. Together for 5. 5 years of him watching me stress about money, letting me work 2 jobs to help pay off my student loans, sitting beside me as I calculated grocery budgets down to the penny. I remember the night that I'd cried because I couldn't afford to fly home for my grandmother's funeral. My parents had made it clear I wasn't welcome, and I couldn't justify the expense on our tight budget. Kieran had held me while I sobbed, stroking my hair and murmuring that it would be okay, that we'd figure something out. He could have bought me a first-class ticket without blinking. Hell, he could have bought the entire airline. The worst part wasn't the money he had hidden. It was the watching. Watching me struggle, watching me sacrifice, watching me make choice after choice based on a financial reality that apparently didn't exist. I tried calling him, straight to voicemail. His phone always went to voicemail during work hours. Construction sites are loud, he'd explained. Another lie? Or just another half-truth in a marriage apparently built on them? "Hey, it's Kieran. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." The same casual, warm voice that told me he loved me every morning before leaving for work. The same voice that had whispered wedding vows about honesty and partnership and facing life together. I couldn't leave a message. What would I even say? Hi, honey, funny story. I just found out you're a billionaire. Call me back. Instead, I opened my laptop again and started researching. If Forbes knew about Kieran's fortune, there had to be more information somewhere. I felt like a detective investigating my own husband, and the irony wasn't lost on me. The deeper I dug, the more surreal it became. Business Week had a piece from 6 months ago about, quote, anonymous tech investors reshaping the startup landscape. TechCrunch mentioned a mysterious O'Sullivan Holdings that had funded dozens of breakthrough companies. The Wall Street Journal had speculation about the, quote, ghost billionaire who preferred to work through intermediaries and shell companies. My husband who came home exhausted every day, who complained about his boss giving him grief about project deadlines, who insisted we shop at discount grocery stores to, quote, stay grounded. I found photos of him at what appeared to be business meetings, grainy shots taken from across restaurant patios or through office windows. In every single one of them, he looked like a completely different person. Confident, authoritative, expensive, not the easygoing guy who sang off-key in the shower and left his socks on the bedroom floor. A memory surfaced that made my chest tight. Last month, when our washing machine had broken, I'd spent 3 days researching the cheapest repair options. We'd ended up going to a laundromat for 2 weeks because I couldn't justify the expense of a new machine on our budget. Kieran had been patient, even helpful, carrying our laundry baskets and feeding quarters into the machines. $3.2 billion, and he'd let me wash our clothes at a laundromat to save money. My phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? My voice came out hoarse. Is this Natasha O'Sullivan? A woman's voice, crisp and professional. Yes. This is Rebecca Chen from Forbes magazine. I'm calling about our story on your husband. We'd love to get a comment from... I hung up. The phone immediately started ringing again. Different number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another, then another. By noon, I had 17 missed calls from various news outlets, financial magazines, and numbers I didn't recognize. I finally turned the phone off completely and sat in the sudden silence of our apartment. The radiator clanged its familiar rhythm, traffic hummed outside our window. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 3 hours ago, except that nothing was the same at all. I walked to our bedroom and opened Kieran's dresser drawers. Work shirts, all worn soft from washing, jeans with actual holes in the knees, socks with mismatched pairs. In the back of his sock drawer, I found something I'd never noticed before. A small velvet box, the kind that holds expensive jewelry. Inside was a watch, not just any watch, a Patek Philippe that looked like it cost more than most people's cars. The inscription on the back read, "To Kieran for excellence in innovation, Board of Directors, Meridian Industries, 2019. I had never heard of Meridian Industries. I put the watch back exactly where I'd found it and closed the drawer. Then I sat on our bed, the bed we'd bought secondhand from a young couple moving across the country, and tried to figure out who I'd married. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Valdez from 3B arguing with her teenage son about taking out the trash. Normal sounds from a normal Tuesday in our normal building where normal people lived normal lives. I wasn't sure I qualified as normal anymore. At 3:47 p.m., I heard Kieran's key in the lock, the familiar sound of his work boots on the hardwood, the thud of his tool bag hitting the floor by the door. Nat, you home, sweetheart? I stayed in the bedroom, heart pounding. I heard him moving around the kitchen, probably wondering about the missing coffee mug, the paper towels I'd left on the counter. Babe, everything okay? His voice was getting closer. In a moment, he'd walk through that bedroom door and I'd have to look at his face and ask him to explain 3 years of lies. I'd have to ask my husband to tell me who he really was.
I heard his footsteps approaching the bedroom, the familiar rhythm of his walk that I'd memorized over 5 years together. But now even that felt foreign. How well could I really know someone's walk when I didn't even know their bank account? "Kieran?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Sit down." His expression shifted slightly, picking up on something in my voice. He perched on the edge of our bed, still holding his gloves. "Okay. What's going on?" I pulled out my phone and opened the Forbes article, then turned the screen toward him. For a split second, maybe half a heartbeat, I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition. Then it was gone, replaced with confusion. "What is this?" he asked, taking the phone. "You tell me." He scrolled through the article, his brow furrowing. This is crazy. Someone must have made a mistake, mixed up names or something." He looked up at me with what appeared to be genuine bewilderment. "Matt, you don't actually think this is about me, do you?" "The Oscar for Best Performance goes to," I thought bitterly.
There's a photo of you, Kieran. Multiple photos. Those could be anyone. Your name is Kieran O'Sullivan. You're 28 years old. You grew up in foster care in Millbrook. I rattled off the details from the article. Should I keep going? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the screen. When he finally looked up, the confusion was gone. In its place was something I'd never seen before, a careful blankness, like he was deciding how much to reveal. "Where did you find this?" he asked quietly. "It's on every major news website. Priya texted me this morning." My voice was getting stronger now, fueled by anger. "The question isn't where I found it. The question is how long you were planning to keep lying to me. I never lied to you." "Really?" I stood up, pacing to the window. "So when you told me you worked construction, that was the truth?" "I do work construction. And when you let me stress about money for 3 years, when you watched me work 2 jobs to pay off student loans, when you let me wash our clothes at a laundromat because we couldn't afford to fix our washing machine," my voice was rising with each accusation. "That was all, what, a fun game for you?" "Natasha, please let me explain." "Explain what? How you've been playing house with the poor girl while sitting on a fortune worth more than some country's GDP? I spun around to face him. He stood up, running his hands through his hair. For the first time since I'd known him, Kieran genuinely looked distressed. "It's not a lie. Everything between us, our relationship, our marriage, how I feel about you, that's all real. But the money is real too, isn't it?" A long pause. Then, quietly, "Yes." The admission hit me like a physical blow. Even though I'd known it was coming, hearing him say it made it real in a way that reading about it hadn't. "How much?" I asked. "Does it matter? How much?" He sat back down heavily. "The Forbes estimate is approximately correct. $3.2 billion. I said each word slowly, like I was learning a foreign language. "That's not approximately anything. That's more money than most people can even conceptualize." "I know. And you've just been, what, slumming it with me? Living like a regular person for kicks?" "No!" The force of his response startled both of us. "God, no, Natasha, that's not what this is." "Then what is it?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Have you ever noticed how people change when they find out you have money? Not just a little money, real money." "I wouldn't know. I've never had real money." "I built my first company when I was 19. Sold it for $40 million when I was 21. He was staring at his hands. "Suddenly, every friend I had wanted something. Every woman I dated was calculating what I was worth. My foster siblings, who hadn't spoken to me in years, started calling with sob stories and business propositions." I wanted to interrupt to point out that not everyone was like that, but something in his posture stopped me. I tried being honest about it for a while, put it right out there. Successful entrepreneur, multiple businesses, financially secure. "Do you know what happened?"
I shook my head. I became a commodity. Every conversation was about investments or opportunities or what I could buy. Every relationship became transactional. People stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a bank account with legs. So you decided to lie instead. I decided to see if anyone could love me without knowing what I was worth. And then I met you. Despite my anger, I felt a small crack in my resolve. Kieran, he continued, you fell in love with a construction worker, someone you thought had nothing to offer except himself. No fortune, no connections, no safety net. Just me. And that was enough for you. But it wasn't just you. It was you plus this massive lie. Was it, though? He leaned forward. Did my bank account change how I treated you? Did it change the way I held you when you cried about your parents? Did it change the fact that I learned to cook your grandmother's recipes because they made you feel less homesick? I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it. Because he was right in a way. The man that I'd fallen in love with, his kindness, his humor, his steady presence, none of that had been an act.
You let me struggle, I said finally. You watched me choose between groceries and gas money. You let me skip meals so we could make rent. His face crumpled. I know. And that's the part I can't forgive myself for. I kept thinking I'd tell you soon, and then it became harder and harder to find the right moment. 3 years, Kieran. 3 years of the right moment? I was scared, he admitted. Terrified that once you knew, you'd never look at me the same way again. That I'd become just another rich guy, and you'd start wondering if you married me for the wrong reasons. That's not your choice to make, I said, my anger flaring again. You don't get to decide what I can handle or how I might react. You stole my agency, my ability to make informed decisions about my own life. He nodded miserably. You're right. Your watch, I said suddenly. What? I found a Patek Philippe in your sock drawer from Meridian Industries. His shoulders sagged. That was from when we acquired their AI division 2 years ago. We? My investment group. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your investment group. Of course. What else don't I know? Do you own this building? Have you been paying our rent this whole time? No, he said quickly. I mean, I could buy the building, but I don't own it. Our rent comes from my construction salary. How generous of you to live on the salary from your hobby job. We stared at each other across our small bedroom, the weight of 3 years of deception hanging between us like a physical presence. Outside, normal life continued. Cars honking, neighbors arguing, the ice cream truck playing its tinny melody. But inside our apartment, everything had shifted. What happens now? I asked. He looked at me with desperate hope. Can we figure this out? Can we get past this? I didn't have an answer. 24 hours ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was married to. Now, I wasn't sure I knew anything at all. I need time, I said finally. I need to think. How much time? I don't know. He nodded, though I could see it was killing him. Should I stay somewhere else tonight? Maybe that would be best. As he packed a bag, moving quietly around our bedroom, I called the one person I knew would have advice, even if I wasn't ready to hear it. Aunt Cecilia, it's Natasha. I need to talk. Sweetheart, slow down. You're not making any sense. Aunt Cecilia's voice was warm and steady through the phone, the same tone she'd used when I was 8 and convinced the world was ending because I'd failed a spelling test. I was pacing around our living room, having moved there after Kieran left with his overnight bag. The apartment felt cavernous without him, like all the furniture had suddenly spread out to fill the empty space he'd left behind. He's been lying to me for 3 years, Aunt Cece. 3 years of watching me stress about money while he's sitting on billions. I collapsed onto our secondhand couch, the one with the broken spring that always poked me in the ribs. I don't even know who I married. Honey, take a breath. Tell me everything from the beginning. So I did. I told her about the Forbes article, about the confrontation, about the watch and the lies, and the terrible realization that my entire adult life had been built on a foundation I didn't even know existed. She listened without interrupting, making only small sounds of acknowledgement.
When I finished, there was a long pause. "Well," she said finally, "that's certainly not what I expected when my phone rang. What am I supposed to do? How do I trust him again?" "That's the wrong question, darling. What's the right question?" "The right question is, do you want to trust him again?" I didn't have an answer for that. The hurt was too fresh, too overwhelming. But underneath the anger and betrayal, there was something else I didn't want to examine too closely. Relief. Relief that we weren't actually living paycheck to paycheck. Relief that I wouldn't have to choose between groceries and gas money anymore. And that relief made me feel guilty, which made me angrier. "Your parents called me this morning," Aunt Cecilia said carefully. My stomach dropped. "What did they say?" "Oh, you can imagine. Your mother was practically vibrating with vindication. Apparently, they'd always known there was something different about Kieran. They disowned me for marrying him. And now they're trying to figure out how to undisown you without admitting they were wrong." There was a dry humor in her voice. "Your father actually used the phrase, reassess the situation." I closed my eyes. Of course they had. The moment they learned that the nobody construction worker was actually worth more than their entire pharmaceutical empire, suddenly their daughter wasn't such a disappointment anymore. "They want to see you," Aunt Cecilia continued carefully. "Tonight, if possible. They're driving down from Crescent Bay." "Absolutely not." "I told them you'd say that."
Good, because I'm not ready to deal with their hypocrisy on top of everything else. Natasha, sweetheart, I'm going to say something you might not want to hear. I braced myself. Aunt Cecilia had never been one to sugarcoat difficult truths. Your husband made a terrible mistake, a costly one, but think about why he made it. Because he didn't trust me. Because he'd been hurt before. Because money changes everything, and he knew it. Look at your parents. They're proving his point right now. That's different. Is it? Honey, you've been married to this man for 3 years. Has he been cruel to you? Controlling? Dismissive? No, but has he supported your career, encouraged your dreams, made you feel loved and valued? Yes, but then maybe the question isn't whether you can forgive him for having money. It's whether you can forgive him for being afraid to tell you about it. I hated that she was making sense. I wanted to stay angry, to nurse my righteous indignation. But Aunt Cecilia had a way of cutting through emotional fog to get to the heart of things. I just keep thinking about all the times I stressed about money, all the sacrifices I made that were completely unnecessary. Were they unnecessary, though? What do you mean? You said he never actually let you go without, right? That somehow, mysteriously, things always worked out? I thought about it. The student loans that had been automatically paid off, the rent that was always exactly what we could afford on our combined salaries, the car repairs that never seemed to cost as much as they should have. Oh my God. He was taking care of everything behind the scenes. Sounds like it. Sounds like he was trying to give you the experience of building a life together without the actual financial stress. But I didn't know that. I was still stressed. And that's where he messed up. He should have trusted you with the truth. But, sweetie, his heart was in the right place. I wasn't ready to admit that yet. The hurt was still too raw. But for the first time since reading that article, I felt like maybe this wasn't completely unfixable. My phone buzzed with a text. Kieran, staying at the Marriott downtown, room 847 if you need anything. I love you. Another buzz, this time from a number I recognized but hadn't seen in 3 years. My mother. Natasha, darling, we need to talk. We're driving down tonight. We'll be at the Grand View Hotel. Call me. The audacity was breathtaking. 3 years of radio silence, and now suddenly I was darling again? They're here, aren't they? Aunt Cecilia asked, apparently sensing my mood shift. On their way. Mom wants to talk.
What are you going to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to tell them to go to hell. Part of me wants to see them squirm. And part of you misses them. I hated that she was right again. Despite everything, despite the disownment and the cruel words and the 3 years of silence, they were still my parents. I'd miss them at my college graduation, at my wedding, during every holiday and birthday and milestone that had passed without acknowledgement. I'm not ready, I said. You don't have to be ready, honey, but maybe consider this. You're in a position of power now. For the first time in your life, you have something they want, access to a fortune they can't ignore. You don't have to forgive them, but you can use this opportunity to set some ground rules. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of our apartment, my apartment, trying to process the day. 24 hours ago, my biggest worry was whether we could afford to get the air conditioning fixed before summer hit full force. Now I was grappling with the revelation that my husband was a billionaire and my estranged parents were speeding down the highway to reconcile with me. I walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, staring at its meager contents. Store-brand yogurt, leftover takeout from our favorite cheap Thai place, a half-empty carton of milk that was probably approaching its expiration date. Had Kieran been silently laughing at our careful budget every time he opened this door? No, I realized. He was participating in it, eating the same generic cereal, wearing the same thrift store clothes, living the same carefully calculated life. The question was, why? My phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? This is Timothy Graves from the Wall Street Journal. I was hoping you might have a moment to comment on today's Forbes article about your husband. No comment, I said, and hung up. It rang again immediately. Different number, different reporter, same request. I turned it off after the fourth call. The silence that followed was profound. No Kieran humming in the shower, no television murmuring in the background, no construction boots dropping by the front door. Just me and the weight of everything that had changed. I found myself walking to our bedroom, then to Kieran's dresser. I opened the sock drawer den and pulled out the expensive watch. This time, I really looked at it. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the kind of thing that took months to make and cost more than most people's annual salary. The inscription was elegant, engraved in a script that spoke of boardrooms and corporate achievements. But it was hidden in a drawer full of tube socks with holes in them. Maybe that said something about who Kieran really was. Maybe he wasn't the construction worker pretending to be a billionaire. Maybe he was a billionaire trying desperately to remember how to be a regular person. My phone, still face down on the nightstand, lit up with notifications. Even with the ringer off, I could see the screen flashing with incoming calls and texts. The outside world had discovered my existence, and everyone wanted a piece of the story. I thought about Kieran, alone in some sterile hotel room, probably getting his own barrage of calls and interview requests. For the first time all day, I wondered how he was handling this. The man I'd married was intensely private, almost secretive. Having his financial information splashed across every major news outlet must be his worst nightmare. But he'd chosen this life of deception. He'd chosen to build a relationship on half-truths and omissions. The consequences were his to bear. Weren't they? A new text came through from my sister Delilah. Nat, I know you're probably not answering, but Mom and Dad are acting crazy. Mom actually used the word misjudged. I've never heard her admit to being wrong about anything. Call me when you can. I smiled, despite everything. Delilah had been the only family member to attend my wedding, though she'd had to do it secretly. She'd stood as my maid of honor, while our parents refused to even acknowledge the event was happening. Maybe I did need to talk to someone who understood our family dynamics, someone who could help me figure out how to handle whatever was coming next. But first, I needed to decide what I wanted from all of this. Did I want my marriage back? Did I want my parents back? Did I want this newfound wealth that I'd never asked for? Or did I just want to understand why everyone in my life seemed to think money was more important than honesty? I called Delilah back at 9 p.m. after I'd managed to eat half a sandwich and convince myself that hiding in my apartment wasn't solving anything. "Thank God," she said immediately upon answering. "I've been worried sick. Are you okay? Is any of this real?" "Unfortunately, yes. All of it." I curled up on the couch with a cup of tea, grateful to hear a familiar voice that wasn't trying to get a quote for the evening news. "How bad are Mom and Dad?" "Oh, Nat, it's like watching someone try to rewrite history in real time. This morning, Mom was telling Mrs. Henderson from next door that she always suspected Kieran had hidden depths. Hidden depths! 3 days ago, she called him that blue-colored nobody when Mrs. Henderson asked why you never visit. Despite everything, I almost laughed. That sounds about right. They're at the Grandview Hotel. Dad's been making phone calls all afternoon. I think he's trying to figure out what Kieran's companies do so he can sound informed when he talks to you. Mom's been shopping for an outfit appropriate for reconnecting with her daughter. Jesus. It gets worse. They called Uncle Richard to ask about proper protocols for socializing with billionaires. Apparently, there might be etiquette involved that they don't want to mess up. Uncle Richard was my father's younger brother, who'd married into old money and had spent the last 20 years desperately trying to fit into high society. The idea of my parents consulting him for advice on handling wealth was both pathetic and infuriating. They're actually going to show up here, aren't they? Probably. Mom mentioned something about giving you time to process, but also not letting too much time pass. I think she's worried someone else might get to you first. Someone else? Other family members, distant relatives who might suddenly remember they exist. You know how this works, Nat. Money brings people out of the woodwork. I hadn't thought about that yet. My father had 3 siblings, and my mother came from a family of 6. Most of them had been perfectly content to follow my parents' lead in cutting me off. But now... Have you heard from anyone else? Cousin Bradley called Dad this afternoon. Apparently, he has a business proposition he'd love to discuss with Kieran. And Aunt Melanie, you remember her, right? Mom's sister who moved to Arizona. She sent a Facebook message asking for your phone number because she wanted to reconnect and catch up. My head was starting to pound. This is exactly what Kieran was afraid of. What do you mean?
I told her about the conversation in our bedroom, about Kieran's explanation for why he'd hidden his wealth. He said money changes everything, changes how people see you, how they treat you. And he's being proven right. It's so disgusting, Del. These people wrote me off completely. Mom and Dad acted like I was dead to them. And now suddenly, because my husband has money, I'm worth their time again? It is disgusting, Delilah agreed. But it's also an opportunity. How do you figure? Think about it. For the first time in your life, you have leverage with them. They want something from you. Access to Kieran, to his wealth, to whatever social status comes with being connected to a billionaire. You can set terms. It was almost exactly what Aunt Cecilia had said. But the idea of having leverage over my own parents felt wrong, like a perversion of what family relationships should be. I shouldn't have to leverage my parents into treating me with basic respect. No, you shouldn't. But they lost the right to unconditional family love when they disowned you for marrying someone they thought was beneath you. Now they have to earn their way back. I sipped my tea, thinking about that. What would you do? Honestly, I'd make them grovel. I'd make them acknowledge exactly what they did wrong and why it was wrong. I'd make them apologize not just to you, but to Kieran. And I'd make them promise to never, ever treat any of their children like that again. And if they refuse, then you know where you stand. At least you'll have clarity. After we hung up, I found myself thinking about the last conversation I'd had with my parents. It was 3 years ago, 2 weeks before my wedding. I'd driven up to Crescent Bay to personally invite them, hoping that seeing me face to face might soften their position. My father had answered the door in his golf clothes, and I could see my mother in the background arranging flowers in the foyer. She'd turned her back when she saw me. Natasha. His voice had been cold, formal. I thought we were clear about our position. Dad, please. He's a good man. If you just met him. I don't need to meet him. I've seen his background check. That had stopped me cold. You ran a background check on my fiancé? Of course I did. Foster care system, no family connections, no significant assets, no college education. He's exactly what I expected. Someone looking to better his situation through marriage. That's not... You're throwing away everything we've given you. Your education, your trust fund, your social position. For what? For someone who will drag you down to his level? My mother had finally turned around then, her face composed but her eyes hard. We raised you to be better than this, Natasha. We raised you to understand the importance of choosing the right partner, someone who can contribute to your life rather than detract from it. Kieran contributes plenty to my life. What, emotional support? My father's laugh had been bitter. Sweetheart, love doesn't pay for private school for your children. Love doesn't open doors in business or society. Love doesn't protect you when times get hard. Money doesn't guarantee any of those things either. No, but it certainly helps. And you're choosing to give all of that up for someone who has nothing to offer except feelings? That's when my mother had delivered the final blow. If you marry him, you're no longer our daughter. We won't support this decision financially or emotionally, and we won't enable you to make the biggest mistake of your life. I'd stood on their doorstep, in the house where I'd grown up, looking at the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and I had made my choice. Then I guess this is goodbye. I'd walked away and never looked back. Until now. Now, sitting in my modest apartment with the knowledge that my nobody husband was worth more than my parents could probably comprehend, their words took on a different meaning. They'd been worried about Kieran using me for my family's money and connections. They never considered that maybe I was the one who had nothing to offer. The irony was almost too perfect. Kieran had more money than my father, more business success than anyone in my family's social circle, and more genuine kindness than my parents had ever shown. By their own shallow metrics, he was the perfect catch. But they judged him by his clothes and his job title, never bothering to look deeper. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. O'Sullivan, this is Janet Reyes from TMZ. We'd love to chat about your fairy tale love story. 6 figures for an exclusive. 6 figures for talking about my marriage. I deleted the message and blocked the number. Another text, this time from Kieran. I know you probably don't want to hear from me right now, but I thought you should know, reporters have been calling my construction company, asking questions about me. I'm worried they might bother you at work tomorrow.
I hadn't thought about work. I was supposed to teach 3 classes tomorrow at Riverside Community College, where I'd been an adjunct professor for the past 2 years. The idea of facing my colleagues, my students, the administration, while this media circus swirled around me was overwhelming. I texted back, "Thanks for the warning." His response came immediately. "I'm so sorry, Nat, for all of this. I never wanted our life to become a public spectacle." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "But you knew this might happen eventually." I hoped it wouldn't. I was naive. What happens now, with the publicity, I mean? I don't know. I've never dealt with anything like this before. I've spent years staying under the radar. It occurred to me that in all of this, I'd been so focused on my own feelings that I hadn't really considered what this meant for Kieran. His carefully constructed privacy had been shattered. His quiet life had been blown apart. And it wasn't like he could just go back to work tomorrow and pretend nothing had happened. "Are you okay?" I typed. "Are you asking as my wife or as someone making polite conversation?" Fair question. I didn't know which one I was.
I'm asking as someone who's concerned about you. Then no, I'm not okay. But I'm more worried about you, about us. I started to type several different responses and deleted them all. Finally, I settled on, I need more time. I know. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. I turned off my phone and sat in the darkness of our living room, listening to the sounds of the building around me. Mrs. Valdez's TV was too loud again. Someone was cooking something that smelled like garlic and onions. A couple was arguing in the apartment above us. Normal sounds, normal lives, normal problems. Tomorrow, I'd have to figure out how to navigate a world where none of this felt normal anymore, where my husband's fortune made us targets for media attention and family manipulation, where every relationship would be filtered through the lens of money and what people thought they could get from us. But tonight, I just wanted to sit in the quiet and remember what it felt like when the most complicated thing in my life was whether we could afford to order pizza for dinner. Those days seemed very far away now. I woke up the next morning to the sound of someone pounding on my door. For a confused moment, I thought it was Kieran coming home until I remembered that he had keys and was staying at a hotel. The pounding continued, insistent and demanding. "Natasha, open this door right now!" My mother's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the morning quiet. I checked my phone, 7:23 a.m. They hadn't even waited for a decent hour. "We know you're in there, sweetheart," my father's voice joined in, though his tone was more controlled. "We drove all night to see you." I stumbled to the peephole and looked out. There they were, my parents, standing in the hallway of my modest apartment building, looking completely out of place. My mother was wearing what appeared to be a new outfit, something expensive and understated that screamed, "I have money, but I'm humble enough to tone it down." My father wore his best suit, the one he usually reserved for board meetings. Behind them, I could see Mrs. Valdez from 3B peeking out her door, clearly enjoying the drama. "Natasha, please," my mother said, her voice softer now. "We just want to talk." I leaned against the door, my heart racing. I wasn't ready for this. I'd planned to have at least another day to figure out what I wanted to say, how I wanted to handle their inevitable appearance. But here they were, forcing the confrontation whether I was prepared or not. "Go away," I called through the door. "I'm not ready to see you." "Darling, we understand you're upset, but this is important. There are things we need to discuss." "Like what? Your sudden change of heart now that you know Kieran has money?" There was a pause. I could practically hear them exchanging glances. "It's not about the money," my mother said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Really? Then why are you here now when you couldn't be bothered to return my calls for 3 years?" Another pause, longer this time. "We may have misjudged the situation," my father said carefully.
Misjudged. I yanked open the door so fast they both jumped back. "You disowned me. You told me I was no longer your daughter. You said I was throwing my life away on a nobody. Which part of that was a misjudgment?" Seeing them up close was harder than I had expected. They looked older, smaller somehow. My mother's perfectly styled hair couldn't hide the new lines around her eyes, and my father's expensive suit couldn't disguise how he'd aged in the 3 years since I'd seen him. "May we come in?" my mother asked quietly. "We'd prefer not to have this conversation in the hallway." I glanced at Mrs. Valdez, who was making no effort to hide her eavesdropping. "Fine, but this doesn't mean anything." I stepped aside, and they entered my apartment. I watched them take in the secondhand furniture, the small kitchen, the general modesty of our life. If they were expecting to see signs of hidden wealth, they were disappointed. "Coffee?" I asked, more out of ingrained politeness than genuine hospitality. "That would be lovely," my mother said, sitting carefully on the edge of our couch like she was afraid it might stain her outfit. I busied myself with the coffee maker, grateful for something to do with my hands. "So," I said without turning around, "what exactly brings you here? And don't say it's not about the money, because we both know that's a lie." "Natasha?" my father began. "We owe you an apology." I spun around. "Do you? For what, specifically?" He looked uncomfortable. For, for not supporting your decision to marry Kieran. Try again. "For cutting off contact with you," my mother added. Still not there. They looked at each other, clearly struggling. Finally, my father spoke again. "For judging your husband based on our own prejudices instead of his character. Better, but you're still dancing around the real issue." "Which is?" my mother asked, though her tone suggested she knew exactly what I was getting at. "Which is that you only care about character now that you know he has money. If Forbes had never published that article, you'd still be pretending I don't exist." The coffee maker beeped, and I poured 3 cups, my hands steadier than I felt. I brought them to the living room and sat across from my parents, studying their faces. "We made a mistake. A terrible mistake." "Yes, you did. But the question is, what kind of mistake do you think you made?" "I don't understand," my father said. "Do you think you made a mistake because you misjudged Kieran's financial worth? Or do you think you made a mistake because you valued money over your daughter's happiness?" The silence stretched between us. Outside, I could hear the morning sounds of the building coming to life. Coffee brewing, showers running, the normal rhythm of people starting their day. "Both," my mother said quietly. "I don't think you understand the difference." I set down my coffee cup. "If Kieran had turned out to be exactly what you thought he was, a construction worker with no money and no prospects, would you be here right now, apologizing?" "Natasha," my father started, "answer the question. If my husband was still just a construction worker, would you be sitting in my living room asking for forgiveness?" They couldn't meet my eyes. That's what I thought. I stood up. "You're not here because you realized you were wrong about what matters in a relationship. You're here because you realized you were wrong about Kieran's bank account. Do you understand how incredibly insulting that is?" "We were trying to protect you," my mother said defensively. "From what? From being happy? From being loved? From building a life with someone who treats me well? From making a decision that would limit your opportunities," my father said. "From settling for less than you deserved. And what exactly did I deserve? A husband who cared more about impressing you than about making me happy? Someone who'd marry me for my trust fund? Someone who could provide for you appropriately. Someone from our social circle, with the right background, the right connections, like Jeffrey Blackstone?" I asked. They both went very still. Jeffrey Blackstone was their preferred choice for me, the son of family friends destined to inherit a pharmaceutical fortune. They'd pushed the relationship for years before I finally put my foot down. "Jeffrey was a good match for you," my mother said carefully. "Jeffrey was arrested last year for embezzling from his own company. Did you know that? He's currently serving 18 months in federal prison." My father's face went pale. We weren't aware." "Right. Connections, right background, right social circle. But wrong character. Funny how that works."
I walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where I'd spent 3 years worrying about whether our beat-up Honda would pass inspection. "Do you want to know what Kieran did last month when Mrs. Chen from downstairs couldn't afford her heart medication?" They didn't answer. "He paid for it, anonymously. Had it delivered to her door with a note saying it was from a church charity. She still doesn't know it was him." "How do you know?" my mother asked. "Because I followed him one day when he said he had to run an errand. I watched him go to 3 different pharmacies to find the best price for her prescription, then drive across town to deliver it to her building manager." I turned back to face them. "That's who you called a nobody. That's the man you said had nothing to offer except feelings. Someone who spends his free time making sure elderly neighbors can afford their medication." "We didn't know," my father began. "Because you didn't want to know.
You took one look at his work clothes and his background and decided he wasn't worth your time. You never asked about his character, his values, his dreams. You never asked me why I fell in love with him. Why did you? My mother asked quietly. I thought about it for a moment. Because he saw me. Not my trust fund, not my family name, not what I could do for his career. Just me. And he decided that was enough. And now? My father asked. How do you feel about him now that you know about his wealth? It was a fair question, and one I'd been grappling with since yesterday. Confused. Hurt that he didn't trust me with the truth. But not because of the money itself. Then why? Because he let me make decisions based on false information. He let me stress about finances that weren't real problems. He took away my agency in my own life. I paused. But he didn't do it to manipulate me or control me. He did it because people like you had taught him that money was the only thing that mattered to most people. The accusation hung in the air between us. So what happens now? My mother asked. I don't know. That depends on what you want. We want our daughter back, my father said. No, I said firmly. You want access to a billionaire. There's a difference. That's not fair, my mother protested. Isn't it? Prove me wrong. Tell me you'd be here if Kieran was still just a construction worker. They couldn't, because we all knew the truth. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to leave. You're going to go back to Crescent Bay and think about what kind of relationship you actually want with me. Not with my husband's money, not with the social status you think comes with being connected to a billionaire, but with me. And then? My mother asked. And then if you can honestly say that you want me in your life regardless of what my husband is worth, we'll talk. But until then, stay away. I walked to the door and opened it. Natasha, please, my mother started. I'm serious. Figure out what matters to you more, your daughter or the money, because you can't have both based on the lie that they're the same thing. They left reluctantly, my mother touching my arm briefly as she passed. We do love you, she whispered. I hope that's true, because it's the only thing that might save this. After they left, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, emotionally drained from the confrontation. The coffee they'd barely touched was still sitting on the table, growing cold in the morning light. I felt like I'd won some kind of battle, but I wasn't sure what the victory meant or what came next. My phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout their visit. More reporters, more relatives, more people who suddenly cared about my existence. I'd been ignoring it all, but now one name caught my attention. Kieran. Can we talk? Not about us necessarily, but about what happens next. This media attention isn't going away. He was right. I'd been so focused on the emotional fallout that I hadn't really considered the practical implications of our lives being turned upside down. I texted back, coffee shop on 5th Street in an hour. I'll be there. The coffee shop was neutral territory, a little place called Jasmine's where we'd had our first official date 5 years ago. It seemed appropriate somehow, going back to where things began to try to figure out where they might go.
I arrived first and chose a corner table, hood up, sunglasses on despite being indoors. I felt ridiculous, but I'd already spotted what looked like a photographer across the street. The last thing I needed was my private conversation with my husband splashed across social media. Kieran walked in exactly on time, and my heart did something complicated when I saw him. He looked tired, older somehow, like the weight of his revealed identity was physically wearing him down. He'd clearly thrown on whatever clothes were handy, jeans and a wrinkled button-down that he'd probably slept in. "Thank you for coming," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "You said this was about practical matters." "It is, mostly." He signaled the waitress for coffee. "I've been getting calls all morning. Reporters, but also lawyers, financial advisors, security companies. Apparently, being publicly identified as a billionaire comes with a whole set of problems I never had to deal with before." Like what? Like the fact that our address is probably going to be public knowledge within the next 24 hours. Like the fact that we're both going to be targets for everything from investment scams to kidnapping attempts. I felt a chill. Kidnapping? It's a real risk. My lawyer, well, one of my lawyers, says I should have had personal security years ago. I just never wanted to live that way. The waitress brought his coffee, and he wrapped his hands around the mug like he was trying to warm himself. There's more, he continued. I've been getting calls all morning. Reporters, but also lawyers, financial advisors, security companies. Apparently, being publicly identified as a billionaire comes with a whole set of problems I never had to deal with before. Like what? Like the fact that our address is probably going to be public knowledge within the next 24 hours. Like the fact that we're both going to be targets for everything from investment scams to kidnapping attempts. I felt a chill. Kidnapping? It's a real risk. My lawyer, well, one of my lawyers, says I should have had personal security years ago. I just never wanted to live that way. The waitress brought his coffee, and he wrapped his hands around the mug like he was trying to warm himself. There's more, he continued. I've been getting calls all morning. Reporters, but also charities. People claiming to be long-lost relatives, from entrepreneurs with business propositions. My hotel room phone has been ringing non-stop since 6 this morning. How did they even find you? Money talks, and apparently so do hotel clerks. Someone paid the front desk for my room number. I stared at him, beginning to understand the scope of what we were dealing with. What do you want to do? I want to disappear again, go back to being anonymous, but that's not really an option anymore. Because? Because now that the story's out there, every financial move I make is going to be scrutinized. Every business deal, every investment, every charitable donation. The IRS is probably going to audit me just for the publicity. And he trailed off, looking uncomfortable. And what? And because I'm married to you, you're going to be part of all of this whether you want to be or not. That hadn't fully occurred to me yet. I'd been so focused on the personal betrayal that I hadn't considered how this would change my day-to-day life. What does that mean, practically speaking? It means you're going to need security. It means we're going to have to move. This apartment isn't safe anymore. It means every financial decision we make is going to be public knowledge. We? He caught my slip immediately. I'm sorry. Every financial decision I make, I know you haven't decided whether there's still a we. I looked down at my hands, still wearing my simple wedding ring. 3 years ago, it had represented everything I thought I knew about my life. Now it felt like a relic from someone else's marriage. Kieran, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay? How much of our relationship was real? He looked genuinely confused. What do you mean? I mean, how much of the man I fell in love with actually exists? The guy who worried about money, who worked construction, who lived modestly. Was any of that real? Or was it all just an elaborate performance? He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. When he finally looked up, his eyes were tired, but sincere. The money was hidden. Everything else was real. But you made choices based on having that money, even if I didn't know about it. You could afford to take risks I couldn't. You could afford to be generous in ways I couldn't. You were playing a different game than I was. You're right. I was. And that wasn't fair to you. So, how do I know who you really are? How do I know what's authentic about you and what's just easy because you have unlimited resources? He leaned forward, his voice intense.
Do you remember when we first started dating and I told you about growing up in foster care? I nodded. Do you remember what I said about the families who took me in just for the monthly payments? You said they never saw you as a person, just as a source of income. Exactly. And do you remember what I said about the one family that was different? The Kowalskis. You said they cared about you as a person, not because of what you could do for them. That's why I hid the money, Nat, because I wanted to know that someone could love me for who I am, not what I'm worth. The Kowalskis didn't know I was going to become successful. They just saw a messed up kid who needed stability and love.
I felt my chest tighten. And you wanted me to be your Kowalski family? I wanted to know that what we had was real, that it would survive without money as a factor. But it was still a factor, Kieran. It was always a factor. You just hid it from me. I know, and I'm not saying I was right. I'm saying I was scared. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but all I saw was exhaustion and regret. What would have happened if you'd told me the truth from the beginning? I don't know. Maybe you would have fallen in love with me anyway. Maybe the money wouldn't have mattered. Or maybe you would have seen dollar signs instead of seeing me. Maybe our first fight would have been about how I spent my money. Maybe you would have quit your job and expected me to support you. Or maybe you would have felt like you couldn't contribute anything meaningful to the relationship. So you decided to make that choice for me. Yes, and that was wrong. I sipped my coffee, thinking about all the conversations we'd had about money over the years, the times I'd felt guilty about spending $20 on a book while he'd been sitting on billions, the times I'd suggested we skip dinner out so we could afford to fix the car. I felt so stupid yesterday, realizing that every financial stress I'd had was completely unnecessary. It wasn't unnecessary. It was real to you. Your feelings were real, even if the circumstances weren't what you thought they were. But you were managing those circumstances behind the scenes, weren't you? Making sure things always worked out. He nodded, reluctantly. Sometimes. The student loans that mysteriously got paid off? Anonymous donation program through your university. The rent that was always exactly what we could afford? I may have had a conversation with your landlord about keeping increases minimal. The car repairs that never cost as much as they should have? I have a friend who owns the garage. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. My entire adult life has been subsidized by my husband's secret fortune? Nat. No, it's okay. I think I'm starting to understand something. What? I want to know who you really are, not the construction worker character you created, not the billionaire in the Forbes article, but the real person, the one who's been hiding behind both of those identities. I'm not sure I know anymore. Then maybe it's time to figure it out. I stood up, leaving money on the table for my coffee. Where are you going? He asked. Home. To pack. You're right about the apartment not being safe anymore. And after that? I don't know yet. But Kieran, when you figure out who you really are, let me know. We can't rebuild anything on another foundation of lies. I left him sitting in the coffee shop where we had our first date, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I had a clear sense of what I needed. I needed the truth. All of it. Even if it meant losing everything I thought I knew about my life. When I got back to the apartment, I found 3 reporters camped outside the building and a photographer trying to get shots through our living room window from the fire escape. My quiet little life had officially become a circus. I called building security, as such it was, and managed to get inside through the back entrance. Mrs. Valdez intercepted me in the hallway, her eyes bright with excitement. Mija, there are people everywhere. They're asking questions about you and your husband. I told them nothing, but that woman from Channel 7 offered me money for an interview. Thank you for not talking to them, Mrs. Valdez. Of course not. But, Natasha, is it true?
Is your husband really a billionaire? Even our sweet elderly neighbor, who had never shown interest in anything beyond her soap operas and her cat, was looking at me differently now. I could see the calculation in her eyes, the sudden awareness that I might be someone worth knowing. It's complicated, I said, and escaped into my apartment. I started packing mechanically, throwing clothes into suitcases without much thought about what I'd need or where I was going. The apartment felt contaminated somehow, like the revelation of Kieran's wealth had poisoned the simple happiness we'd built here. As I was folding clothes, I found something tucked into one of Kieran's dresser drawers that I'd missed before. A legal document with letterhead from a firm I didn't recognize, Hartwell, Morrison and Associates, LLP. The document was titled Marital Asset Protection Trust and dated 6 months after our wedding.
I scanned the dense legal language, my heart sinking as I began to understand what I was reading. It was a postnuptial agreement, never signed, outlining how Kieran's assets would be protected in the event of divorce. The provisions were generous, I would receive a substantial settlement, but the underlying message was clear. He'd been planning for the possibility that our marriage might not survive the revelation of his wealth. There was a sticky note attached in Kieran's handwriting. Draft only. Never filed. Couldn't bring myself to ask her to sign it. K. I sat down hard on the bed, the document trembling in my hands. Even 3 years ago, he'd been thinking about exit strategies. He'd been planning for the day when his lies would catch up with him and our marriage would implode. But he hadn't filed it. He'd kept it as a draft, unable to take that final step that would have made our relationship feel transactional. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. Delilah. Nat, where are you? There are news vans outside Mom and Dad's house. Someone leaked that they drove down to see you yesterday. Great. Just great. It gets worse. Someone got a photo of them leaving your building this morning. The headline on the Chronicle's website is Billionaire's In-Laws Come Crawling Back. I closed my eyes. They're going to be furious. Actually, they're panicking. Dad's been on the phone with his PR firm all morning trying to figure out how to spin this. Apparently, having your estrangement from your billionaire son-in-law become public knowledge isn't great for the family image. I can't deal with their embarrassment on top of everything else. There's more, Nat. I hate to tell you this, but Cousin Bradley gave an interview to some financial blog. He's claiming he always knew there was something special about Kieran and that the family is thrilled about the situation. Bradley, who called Kieran that loser construction worker at Christmas dinner 2 years ago? The very same. He's apparently positioning himself as the family member who was always supportive of your marriage. I laughed bitterly. Of course he is. And Aunt Melanie posted on Facebook about how proud she is of her successful niece and how she always knew you'd marry well. I haven't spoken to Aunt Melanie in 5 years. Money makes people very creative with their memories. After we hung up, I continued packing, my movements becoming more agitated with each relative's betrayal Delilah had shared. These people had written me off completely, treated me like a disappointment, and now they were rewriting history to position themselves as my supporters. Kieran had been right about money changing everything, but he'd been wrong about one thing. It wasn't just changing how people treated him, it was changing how they treated me, and I hadn't even known the money existed until yesterday. I was throwing toiletries into a bag when I heard a knock at the door. Different from my parents' demanding pound. This was softer, more tentative. Mrs. O'Sullivan? A woman's voice, professional but not aggressive. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm an attorney with Hartwell Morrison and Associates. Your husband asked me to speak with you. He sent his lawyer? Actually, I specialize in helping families navigate sudden wealth disclosure. It's more common than you'd think. I let her in, curious despite my irritation at Kieran for sending someone without asking. Miss Chen, Sarah, please. Sarah, I'm not sure what Kieran told you, but I'm not interested in discussing financial arrangements right now. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because your husband is terrified that he's about to lose the most important thing in his life, and he doesn't know how to fix it. I gestured for her to sit. Did he tell you everything? About the lies, the deception?
He did, and I told him he was an idiot. That surprised me. You did? Mrs. O'Sullivan, Natasha, I've worked with dozens of ultra-high net worth individuals who struggle with relationship authenticity. Most of them handle it by only dating within their social and economic circle, where everyone understands the rules. Your husband chose a different path. He chose to lie. He chose to prioritize emotional authenticity over financial transparency. It was misguided, but it wasn't malicious. I studied her face. Are you here to convince me to forgive him? I'm here to give you information so you can make informed decisions. That's what lawyers do. What kind of information? She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. This is a security assessment of your current situation. This building has no doorman, no secure entry, minimal surveillance. Your teaching schedule is public information through the college. Your car is registered in your name and parked in an unsecured lot. Are you trying to scare me?
I'm trying to prepare you. Yesterday morning, you were a community college professor married to a construction worker. Today, you're married to one of the wealthiest men in the country. The world sees you differently now, whether your marriage survives or not. She pulled out another document. This is a preliminary asset disclosure. If you divorce, these are the assets that would be subject to division under state law. I glanced at the numbers and felt dizzy. I don't want his money. That's admirable, but it's not really your choice. You've been married for 3 years, during which time these assets grew substantially. Whether you want it or not, you have a legal claim. What if I signed something waiving that claim? You could, but that would raise questions about coercion, about whether you're making decisions under duress. It would actually make things more complicated, not less. I sank back into the couch. So, I'm trapped? You're connected. There's a difference. She leaned forward. Natasha, can I speak frankly? Please? Your husband made a terrible mistake. But in my experience, the people who lie about money usually do it for one of two reasons. Either they're trying to exploit someone, or they're trying to protect something precious. Everything I've seen suggests your husband falls into the second category. How can you tell? Because he's been supporting you financially for years without you knowing it. Because he created systems to take care of you while maintaining your independence. Because when his secret was exposed, his first concern was your safety, not protecting his assets. She gathered the documents. I'm not telling you what to decide about your marriage, but I'm telling you that you need to make decisions about your immediate safety and your legal situation. Those are separate from your feelings about your husband. What are you recommending? Secure housing, immediately, personal security until the media attention dies down, legal representation that's independent from your husband's interests, and time to process all of this without external pressure. She stood to leave. For what it's worth, Natasha, your husband spent an hour this morning researching divorce attorneys for you. He wanted to make sure you had access to the best representation, even if it meant helping you leave him. After she left, I sat surrounded by legal documents and security assessments, feeling like my life had become someone else's movie. Yesterday, my biggest decision was whether to grate papers or clean the apartment. Now I was apparently supposed to choose between personal security firms and consider the asset division implications of my marriage. I picked up my phone and called the one person who might understand what I was going through. Aunt Cecilia, it's Natasha. I think I need help. What kind of help, sweetheart? The kind where you help me figure out who I am when everything I thought I knew about my life turns out to be wrong. Pack a bag, she said immediately. You're coming to stay with me until you figure this out. What about the media? The reporters? Honey, I've been dealing with your family's drama for 60 years. A few reporters don't scare me. For the first time in 2 days, I smiled. I'll be there tonight. Good. And, Natasha, bring those legal documents that lawyer left.
We're going to go through them together and figure out what you actually want, not what everyone else thinks you should want. As I finished packing, I realized that for all the chaos and betrayal and confusion, one thing had become clear. I was tired of other people making decisions about my life without consulting me. It was time to take control of my own story. Aunt Cecilia lived in a restored Victorian house in the hills outside Millbrook, far enough from the city to feel like a different world. I'd always loved visiting her as a child. She was my father's younger sister, but unlike him, she'd never cared much for social status or family expectations. She'd made her money in tech consulting back when women were rare in the field, and she'd used that independence to live exactly as she pleased. Her house reflected that independence. Books everywhere, mismatched furniture that was comfortable rather than coordinated, and a kitchen that always smelled like something delicious was cooking. It was the opposite of my parents' sterile perfection, and right now, it felt like sanctuary. "You look terrible," she said bluntly when I arrived with my hastily packed bags. "When's the last time you ate something that wasn't coffee?" "I had half a sandwich yesterday." "That doesn't count." She ushered me into the kitchen and started pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. "Sit. Talk. I'll cook." I found myself telling her everything, not just about Kieran's deception, but about the legal documents, the media attention, my parents' sudden reappearance, the way that everyone in my life was suddenly treating me differently. "The worst part," I said, watching her chop vegetables with practiced efficiency, "is that I feel like I don't know what's real anymore. Was my marriage real? Are my parents' feelings real? Are people being nice to me because they actually care, or because they think I have access to money?"
Those are three separate questions, Aunt Cecilia said, dumping the vegetables into a pan with olive oil. Let's take them one at a time. Start with the marriage. Okay, tell me about the day you decided you wanted to marry Kieran. Not the proposal, not the wedding planning, the moment when you knew. I thought back. We'd been dating for about 18 months. I got food poisoning from some sketchy sushi, and I was absolutely miserable. Kieran took 3 days off work to take care of me. He didn't just bring me soup and medicine. He researched the best foods for stomach recovery. He set up a humidifier in the bedroom. He even called my boss to explain why I couldn't teach my classes. And that's when you knew? That's when I knew. Because he didn't just want to help, he wanted to help well. He put thought and care into taking care of me. It wasn't performative, it was just him. Did his money factor into that decision at all? I didn't know about his money. Exactly. So that feeling, that recognition of who he was as a person, that was real. His money didn't create that moment or contaminate it. I nodded slowly. But he was still lying to me. Yes, he was. But the qualities you fell in love with, his thoughtfulness, his care, his attention to what you needed, those were real. She started adding broth to the vegetables. Now, your parents. When's the last time they showed genuine interest in your happiness, regardless of how it affected them? I thought about it. I honestly can't remember. Then their sudden concern now isn't real. It's convenient. There's a difference. And everyone else? Some of both, probably. The trick is learning to tell the difference. She tasted the soup and added salt. But here's the thing, Natasha. You're asking the wrong question. What do you mean? You're asking whether other people's feelings are real, but the more important question is, what do you want? Not what you think you should want, not what would make everyone else happy, but what would actually make you feel like you're living authentically. I don't know anymore. Then let's figure it out. She ladled soup into a bowl and set it in front of me. Eat first, then we'll work. The soup was perfect, warm and nourishing and exactly what I needed. As I ate, Aunt Cecilia spread the legal documents Sarah Chen had left across her dining table. "Impressive," she said, studying the asset disclosure. "Your husband has been busy."
It's overwhelming. It's information, and information is power, if you know how to use it. She pulled out a legal pad and pen. Let's make some lists. Lists? What you want, what you don't want, what you're afraid of, what you're angry about. Sometimes you have to get all the noise out of your head before you can hear what your heart is actually saying. For the next hour, we worked through my tangled emotions. The anger at being deceived, the hurt at not being trusted, the fear that our entire relationship had been built on false pretenses, but also the recognition that Kieran's core character, the parts of him I'd fallen in love with, hadn't been fake. Here's what I'm seeing, Aunt Cecilia said, reviewing our lists. You're angry about the deception, but you understand why he did it. You're hurt that he didn't trust you, but you're also seeing evidence that he was trying to protect something precious. You're overwhelmed by the money, but you're not actually angry about having it. So what does that mean? It means you need to decide what matters most, punishing him for lying or rebuilding your relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. What if I can't trust him again? Then you divorce him, take your legal settlement, and build a new life. But Natasha, trust isn't just something that exists or doesn't exist. It's something you choose to rebuild, day by day, decision by decision. My phone buzzed with a text from Kieran. Sarah told me she met with you. I hope it was helpful. I'm staying at the Grandview Hotel now. Thought the Marriott was getting too much attention. I love you. I showed the message to Aunt Cecilia. He's trying, she said. Is that enough? That depends on what enough would look like to you. I thought about it. Complete honesty. About everything. About his business, his money, his past, his plans for the future. No more secrets, no more protecting me from information. And he needs to understand why this was so damaging. Not just apologize for it, but really understand how it affected me. Anything else? I want to know who he really is. Not the construction worker character, not the billionaire businessman, but the actual person. Because I feel like I've been married to a performance. Aunt Cecilia nodded. Those are reasonable requirements. The question is, are you willing to give him a chance to meet them? I don't know. Maybe. Then maybe is where you start.
She helped me craft a message to Kieran. I'm staying with Aunt Cecilia for a few days to think. If you want to try to rebuild this, I need complete transparency. About everything. No more protecting me from difficult truths. And I need time to process without pressure. Can you give me that? His response came within minutes. Yes, whatever you need. Thank you for not giving up on us completely. Now what? I asked. Now you take a few days to breathe, to think, to remember who you are outside of this crisis. And then you decide whether you want to fight for your marriage or fight for your freedom. But you make that decision based on what you want, not on what you think you should want. That night, lying in Aunt Cecilia's guest room, I thought about the different versions of myself I'd been over the past few days. The shocked wife discovering her husband's lies. The disowned daughter confronting her parents' hypocrisy. The sudden billionaire's wife being courted by relatives who'd ignored her for years. But underneath all of those identities was just me, Natasha. A woman who'd fallen in love with someone's kindness and was now trying to figure out whether that kindness was enough to rebuild a relationship damaged by deception. I pulled out my laptop and started writing. Not to Kieran, not to my parents, but to myself. A letter trying to articulate what I actually wanted from my life, independent of everyone else's expectations or manipulations. Dear Natasha, I began, here's what you need to remember about who you are. By the time I finished writing, it was after midnight, and I had a clearer sense of what I wanted to say to my husband. The question was whether he was ready to hear it. 3 days later, I was ready to have the conversation that would determine the future of my marriage. I'd spent those days at Aunt Cecilia's house, thinking, writing, and slowly untangling my emotions from the chaos of everyone else's reactions. I'd also done something I'd never imagined I'd need to do. I'd hired my own lawyer.
Jennifer Walsh was nothing like Sarah Chen. Where Sarah was polished and diplomatic, Jennifer was direct and uncompromising. She specialized in representing spouses in high-asset marriages, and she'd made it clear from our first phone call that her job was to protect my interests, not to save my marriage. "Your husband's lawyer seems competent," Jennifer had said after reviewing the documents Sarah had provided. "But remember, her ultimate loyalty is to him, not to you. That's why you need independent representation." Now, sitting in the conference room of a neutral law office downtown, I faced Kieran across a mahogany table that felt like it was designed for corporate mergers rather than marital reconciliation. He looked terrible, thinner than he'd been a week ago, with dark circles under his eyes, and the kind of tension in his shoulders that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. Sarah Chen sat beside me, professional and composed. Jennifer sat beside me, a stack of documents at her elbow and a legal pad covered in notes. Between us, a court reporter prepared to transcribe whatever we said. It felt formal and cold, nothing like the intimate conversations that should determine the fate of a marriage. But after 3 years of deception, maybe formal and cold is what we needed. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began. "We're here today to facilitate an honest conversation between Kieran and Natasha about the future of their marriage. Everything said here will be confidential and cannot be used in any future legal proceedings." I looked directly at Kieran. "I have questions. Ask me anything. How long have you been wealthy?" "I sold my first company when I was 21 for $40 million. I've been what most people would consider wealthy since then." "And when we met, you were worth?" "About $300 million. I felt Jennifer tense beside me. Even she hadn't expected that number. "So when you told me you were just a construction worker trying to make ends meet, you were worth $300 million? "Yes." "And you let me split grocery bills with you? You let me work 2 jobs to help pay rent? You watched me stress about a $20 textbook?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes." "Why?" He looked down at his hands. "Because I wanted to know what it felt like to be in a relationship where money wasn't a factor, where someone chose me for who I was, not what I could provide." "But you were lying about who you were." "I was hiding one aspect of who I was. A pretty significant aspect, financially, but not personally." I pulled out the letter I'd written to myself 3 nights ago. "Do you want to know what I realized while I was thinking about this?" "Yes." "I realized that you didn't just lie about your money, you lied about your power." He looked confused.
You have the power to solve problems, Kieran, to help people, to make changes, to impact lives. And you hid that from me. You let me feel helpless about things you could have fixed with a phone call. I didn't want you to see me as someone who could fix your problems. I wanted you to see me as someone who would stand beside you while you fix them yourself. That wasn't your choice to make. The words came out sharper than I'd intended. You don't get to decide what I can handle or how I want to live my life. You stole my agency. You're right. Am I? Because you're still doing it. You hired security for me without asking. You had lawyers contact me without discussing it first. You're still making decisions about my life without consulting me. I was trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need partnership. Sarah leaned forward. What would partnership look like to you, Natasha? I opened my laptop and pulled up a document I'd been working on. Complete financial transparency. I want to know about every asset, every investment, every business deal. I want to understand how decisions get made and have input on major choices. That's reasonable, Kieran said. I'm not finished. I want to be involved in your charitable giving. If we're going to have this much money, I want a say in how it's used to help people. Of course. And I want us to see a therapist together, someone who specializes in relationships and trust issues. Agreed? But here's the thing, Kieran. None of that matters if you can't answer one question honestly. What question? Why should I trust you again? The room went quiet. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Kieran was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but raw.
You shouldn't. Not yet. Trust is something I broke, and it's something I have to earn back. I can't give you a reason to trust me again. I can only show you, over time, through consistent honesty and transparency, that I'm worthy of that trust. And if I decide I can't do that, if I decide the foundation is too damaged to rebuild, then I'll respect that decision, and I'll make sure you have everything you need to build a new life. Jennifer slid a document across the table. This is a proposed settlement agreement should you choose to divorce. Kieran glanced at it, then pushed it back without reading it. Whatever Natasha wants. I don't need to review it. You should review it, Sarah said sharply. It's quite generous. I don't care. If she decides to leave, the money is the least important thing. I picked up the settlement agreement and scanned it. The numbers were staggering, more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. But looking at those figures, I realized something important. I don't want your money if we divorce, I said. Everyone in the room stared at me. I want enough to be financially independent, to never have to worry about basic security, but I don't want half of everything you've built. That's not why I married you. Natasha, Jennifer said carefully, you should think about this. We're talking about substantial assets. I have thought about it for 3 days. And I've realized that taking billions of dollars from him would make me exactly what he was afraid I might be, someone who was ultimately motivated by money. I turned to Kieran. But if we stay married, things change. Complete partnership, complete transparency, and we figure out together how to use this wealth in ways that matter. Are you saying you want to try again? I'm saying I want to try something we've never actually done before. I want to try being completely honest with each other. Sarah began pulling out documents. In that case, there are some things you should see. Kieran has been funding several charitable foundations anonymously. Educational scholarships, medical research, disaster relief. If you're going to be partners in this, you should understand the scope of what already exists. For the next 2 hours, I learned about a side of my husband I'd never known existed. The scholarship fund for foster kids aging out of the system, the medical foundation that had funded breakthrough cancer research, the disaster relief organization that had quietly helped rebuild entire communities after hurricanes and floods. Why didn't you tell me about any of this? I asked. Because it would have raised questions about where the money was coming from. So you let me think you were selfish when you were actually giving away millions? I let you think I was ordinary. I looked at the man across from me, my husband, who I was seeing clearly for the first time, not the construction worker character he'd created, not the mysterious billionaire from the news articles, but someone who'd been using extraordinary resources to quietly make the world better.
Okay, I said finally. Okay, what? Okay, let's try this. But we start over. Complete honesty, complete partnership. And if you ever lie to me again, even about something small, we're done. No second chances. I understand. And we do this gradually. I'm not moving back in with you tomorrow. We date again. We rebuild trust. We figure out who we are together when we're both being completely honest. Whatever you need. I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the weight of the conversation. I need time to process all of this. The foundations, the money, what it means for our future. How much time? I don't know, but Kieran, for the first time since this started, I feel like maybe we have a chance. As we left the law office, he touched my arm gently. Thank you for giving us a chance. Thank me when we've actually figured out how to be married to each other honestly. But walking away, I felt something I hadn't felt in a week. Hope. Not certainty, not forgiveness, but hope that maybe, finally, we could build something real together. The question was whether we could do it in the fishbowl our lives had become, with media attention and family manipulation and all the complications that came with extraordinary wealth. I guess we were about to find out.
6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new house, a place we'd chosen together, with security but not ostentation, space but not excess. It was 7 a.m., and I was making coffee in a routine that had become comfortable again, though different from before. Kieran came downstairs in jeans and a button-down, ready for another day at the construction site. Yes, he still worked construction. We'd talked about it extensively in therapy, and Dr. Martinez had helped us understand that the physical work grounded him, kept him connected to who he'd been before the money. Now, though, I knew it was one of several things he did with his time, not a desperate attempt to maintain a fiction. "Morning," he said, kissing my cheek as he reached for his travel mug. 6 months of rebuilding had taught us both that small gestures mattered more than grand ones. "The Times wants a follow-up interview," I said, handing him the coffee, "about how we're adjusting to life in the public eye." "What did you tell them?" "That we're boring now. Happy, but boring." He smiled. "Good answer." It was true, mostly. The media attention had died down after the first few months, especially after we'd made it clear that we weren't going to be the kind of billionaire couple that courted publicity. We gave one joint interview to Forbes, established some basic facts, and then retreated into private life. My phone buzzed with a text from Delilah. "Mom's asking again about Thanksgiving dinner. She wants to know if you've considered her apology." I showed the message to Kieran. "What do you think?" "What do you think?" It had taken me 4 months to respond to my parents' formal letter of apology, a carefully worded document that had clearly been reviewed by their PR firm. When I finally called, the conversation had been stilted and awkward, full of the careful language people use when they're trying to rebuild a bridge they'd burned. "I think I want to try," I said, "but with conditions." "Such as?" "No business talk, no financial questions, no sudden investment opportunities that cousins and uncles want to discuss." "Deal." The truth is, rebuilding my relationship with my parents was harder than rebuilding my marriage. With Kieran, we had love as a foundation, even when trust was broken. With my parents, I was starting to suspect that love had always been conditional. I'd just never noticed the conditions before. But my sister deserved to have family holidays that weren't battlegrounds, and I was learning that forgiveness didn't have to mean forgetting or excusing. It could just mean choosing not to let past hurts control future possibilities. "I have a board meeting at 10, Kieran said, checking his watch. "The Education Foundation wants to expand the college prep program." This was new territory for both of us. Me attending foundation meetings, weighing in on grant decisions, helping to direct how we used our resources. It turned out I had strong opinions about educational equity and disaster relief, and Kieran had been genuinely eager to hear them. "I'll meet you there after my classes," I said. "Dr. Rivera wants to present her research proposal personally." I was still teaching, though only 2 classes now, instead of 4. We'd established a scholarship fund at Riverside Community College, and I'd become involved in curriculum development for first-generation college students. It felt like the right balance between the work I loved and the new responsibilities that came with our situation. My phone rang. Aunt Cecilia. "How are the newlyweds?" "We're not newlyweds, we're re-weds." "Even better. Are you happy?" I considered the question. 6 months ago, I would have said I was happy but naive. 3 months ago, I was angry but hopeful. Now, I'm happy and informed, which feels better than happy and naive. Good answer.
After she hung up, I gathered my things for the day. Lesson plans for my morning classes, notes for the foundation meeting, the small leather journal where I'd been writing down thoughts about our strange new life. Kieran was waiting by the door with my coffee in a travel mug, a habit he'd developed during our reconciliation. Small acts of care, consistently offered, rebuilding trust, one gesture at a time. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." In the car, I thought about the letter I'd written to myself 6 months ago, trying to articulate what I wanted from my life. I'd wanted honesty, partnership, and the freedom to make informed decisions about my own future. I'd also written something else. I want to know that if everything external disappeared, the money, the status, the options that wealth provides, we'd still choose each other. Now I knew the answer to that question.
We'd been through the worst kind of betrayal and the most disorienting kind of revelation, and we'd chosen each other. Not easily, not quickly, but deliberately and with full knowledge of what we were choosing. "Penny for your thoughts," Kieran said, as we pulled into the college parking lot. "Just thinking about how different everything is from a year ago. Better different or just different different? Better. Definitely better. Even with all the complications, the media attention, the family drama, the money management, the foundation meetings." I thought about it, especially with all the complications, because now when we handle them together. He squeezed my hand. "See you at 10? See you at 10. I watched him drive away, off to spend his morning working construction, then his afternoon in a boardroom, then his evening at home with me, planning how to give away money to people and causes that needed it. It was an unusual life, but it was our life, built on a foundation of honesty we'd had to learn how to create honestly. Walking into my classroom, I thought about the lesson I was teaching that morning, personal narrative and the stories we tell ourselves. My students were young, mostly first-generation college students working multiple jobs and juggling family responsibilities. They were writing essays about pivotal moments in their lives, times when everything they thought they knew about themselves had to be reconsidered. I understood that assignment in a way I never had before. "Good morning," I said to the class. "Today we're going to talk about what happens when the story you've been telling yourself about your life turns out to be incomplete." A student in the front row raised her hand. "Professor O'Sullivan, how do you know when a story is incomplete versus when it's just wrong?" I smiled, thinking about everything that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal and the rebuilding, the anger and the forgiveness, the discovery that love could survive even the most foundational lies if both people were willing to do the work of rebuilding it honestly. "That's exactly the right question," I said. "Let's figure it out together." Outside the classroom window, I could see the construction site where my husband was probably at that very moment, doing physical work that kept him grounded while we figured out how to use extraordinary resources to make ordinary people's lives better. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life we'd chosen together, with eyes wide open and no more secrets between us. And for the first time in 6 months, that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.